I never thought the day would come when I'd sit in a hospital waiting room and feel relieved to be alone. No family around, no one checking if I was okay. Just the hum of fluorescent lights above me and a paper cup of bad coffee going cold in my hand. That was the night my son-in-law put me in the emergency room at St. Joseph's, and my daughter stood in my driveway and watched him do it. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me start from the beginning, because you need to understand what kind of man I was before all this happened, and what kind of man I became after. My name is Kenneth, and I'm 67 years old. I spent 31 years working as a pipe fitter in Fort McMurray, Alberta. Winters that would crack your bones, shifts that ran 14 hours some days, and a union that fought hard enough that I came out the other side with a pension, a paid-off house in Red Deer, and enough in savings to live quietly until I don't need to live anymore. My wife, Frances, passed 8 years ago. Cervical cancer. It took her fast, which the doctors said was a mercy, but there's no mercy in watching someone you love disappear in front of you. After she was gone, I sold the house we'd raised our family in and bought a smaller place on the south side, a bungalow with a covered porch and a yard I could manage on my own. I have 2 children. My son lives out in Victoria with his wife and their twin girls, and we talk on the phone every Sunday. He's a good man, works hard, never once asked me for anything I didn't offer first. Then there's my daughter. She's 34. Smart as a whip, always was. Frances used to joke that she got all the brains and I got all the stubbornness, and she wasn't wrong on either count. My daughter got a degree in marketing from MacEwan University in Edmonton, worked her way up at a communications firm, and for a while there I was proud in a way I couldn't quite put into words. She'd call me on her way home from the office, tell me about campaigns she was running, clients she'd won over. I'd sit on my porch and listen and think. Frances would have loved hearing this. That was before she met Bryce. She brought him home at Thanksgiving 3 years ago. I'll be honest with you, my first impression wasn't bad. He was tall, well-dressed, good handshake. Worked in real estate development, he said. Lots of projects on the go in the Edmonton corridor. He had the kind of confidence that fills a room, and my daughter looked at him like he'd hung the moon himself. I kept my mouth shut and passed the turkey. Over the next year, though, I started noticing things. Small things at first. The way he talked over her at dinner. The way she'd start a sentence and then glance at him before finishing it like she needed permission. He had opinions about everything. Her job, her friends, what she ordered at restaurants. I told myself it wasn't my business. She was an adult. Frances used to say I was too quick to interfere, so I sat on my hands and waited. Then came the first ask. It was February, about 18 months after they started dating. My daughter called me on a Tuesday evening, which was unusual. She usually texted during the week. She asked if I'd be willing to lend them some money. Just temporary, she said. Bryce had a development deal that was close to closing, but they needed bridge financing for 60 days, $40,000. I took a breath. I told her I wasn't in a position to do that. She pushed a little, said the return would be quick, said Bryce had done this before with other investors. I said I appreciated that, but I'd worked my whole life for what I had, and I wasn't comfortable putting it at risk on a real estate deal I knew nothing about. She went quiet for a moment, then said she understood. We hung up. 2 days later, Bryce called me directly. I didn't know he had my number. He was friendly, smooth, walked me through the whole thing. I said no again. He laughed a little, like I'd made a joke, and said something like, "You know, a lot of fathers would jump at an opportunity like this for their family." I said I was sure they would, and I wished him well with the deal. He hung up. My daughter didn't call for 3 weeks after that. When she did call, things were fine on the surface. Normal conversation. She didn't mention the money. I didn't bring it up. We talked about Christmas plans, about her cat, about whether I'd had the furnace inspected. I let myself think we'd moved past it. I should have known better. Last spring, they got engaged. She called me with the news on a Friday morning, and I could hear that she was genuinely happy. And whatever I thought about Bryce, I was not going to be the one to take that from her. I told her I was glad for her. I meant it, in the way that you can mean something and still feel uneasy underneath. The engagement party was in June, at a rented venue in Edmonton. I drove up for it. Bryce's family was there. His parents, a brother, a few cousins, his father, a man named Howard, pulled me aside near the end of the night and started talking about the wedding. He and his wife were contributing $25,000, he told me. He said it warmly, like he was proud to do it. I told him that was generous. "What are you thinking on your end?" he asked. I said I hadn't been given a number yet. He looked at me a little strangely, nodded, and we talked about something else. 2 weeks later, my daughter and Bryce came to Red Deer. They said they wanted to have dinner with me, just the 3 of us. I made pot roast, which she's always loved. We ate well, talked about the summer, and then after I'd cleared the plates, she put a piece of paper on the table in front of me. It was a printed budget. The wedding was planned for the following September. The total cost was $112,000. I read it twice to make sure I was reading it right. I looked up at her. This is for a one-day event. She said yes, but explained that it included the venue, the caterer, photography, florals, a band, a videographer, the rehearsal dinner, and the honeymoon, a 2-week trip to Portugal and Spain. And what portion of this is being asked of me, I said. She slid the paper slightly toward me and pointed. My name was written next to a figure of $55,000. Howard and his wife were covering $45,000. Her father was expected to cover the rest, with the groom's family making up the difference. I put the paper down flat on the table. I told them quietly that I wasn't going to pay $55,000 for a wedding. I said I was happy to contribute, genuinely, and I named a figure, $10,000. That was what I could give comfortably, what I could give without it affecting my retirement, my ability to pay my property taxes, my security. Bryce sat back in his chair and crossed his arms. 10,000, he said. It wasn't a question. He said it the way you'd repeat back something you found insulting. I said yes, 10,000. As a gift, with no expectation of anything in return. He looked at my daughter, and something passed between them that I wasn't meant to understand. Then he turned back to me. Howard is putting in 45,000, he said, and you're offering 10. You know how that looks? I said I wasn't particularly concerned with how it looked. You have a pension, he said. You own this house outright. You have RRSP savings. He listed these things like they were evidence in a court case. You're telling me you can't do better than $10,000 for your own daughter's wedding? I kept my voice steady. I asked him how he knew about my RRSP savings. He paused, just a beat. Then he said my daughter had mentioned it. I looked at her. She looked away. I think you two should head home, I said. I'll think about things and we can talk again. Bryce pushed his chair back from the table. He wasn't angry yet, not openly, but there was something underneath the surface that I recognized. I'd worked with men like him on the rigs, men who were used to getting what they wanted, who had no idea what to do with someone who said no and meant it. My daughter squeezed my arm on the way out the door. She said, "Please just think about it, Dad." Her voice was quiet, not angry, almost apologetic. I closed the door behind them and stood in my kitchen for a long time. Over the next 2 weeks, the phone calls came. First from my daughter, asking if I'd reconsidered. Said no, but the 10,000 was still available. Then from Bryce, who called twice. The first call was reasonable, still pushy, but measured. He laid out what he called the optics of my contribution, what it communicated to his family, to their friends. I told him politely that I didn't make financial decisions based on optics. The second call was different. He said that if I wasn't willing to contribute fairly, it would affect things going forward. When I asked what that meant, he said that he and my daughter had discussed it, and they felt it would be better if I wasn't involved in the wedding planning. "Just come on the day," he said, as a guest. I held the phone and let that sit for a moment. "As a guest at my daughter's wedding," I said. He said that's how it would be if I wasn't prepared to be a real partner in making this happen. I told him to put my daughter on the phone. She came on. I asked her directly, was this her decision as well, or was she being told what to say? She was quiet for too long. Then she said she thought it would be better if we all just stepped back for a bit. I told her I loved her, and I hung up. I didn't sleep well that night, or the night after. I'm not a man who cries easily. Years of physical work have a way of pressing things down into you, storing them somewhere you don't have to feel them all the time. But I sat in the dark on that porch, and I thought about Frances, and I thought about the girl she'd raised, and I felt something in my chest that I hadn't felt since the hospital the night my wife died. 10 days passed. No contact from either of them. Then, on a Saturday afternoon in late August, I was in the backyard doing nothing in particular, deadheading the roses Frances had planted, which I've kept going because it seems like the right thing to do. And I heard a car door, then another. I came around the side of the house and Bryce was walking up the front path, and my daughter was a few steps behind him. I said hello. I held the gate open. I asked if they wanted to come inside. Bryce said they'd prefer to talk out front. What followed, I will replay in my head for the rest of my life. He started calmly. He said they'd given me enough time to think it over. He said the venue deposit needed to be paid within 2 weeks or they'd lose it. He said the number was now 60,000. They'd had to revise the budget. And he said if I didn't commit to that figure by the end of the week, they would be moving forward without me. The wedding, the relationship, all of it. I looked at my daughter. She was standing at the edge of the path, arms crossed, looking at the ground. I told Bryce I wasn't going to pay $60,000. I wasn't going to pay 55 either. My offer of 10,000 remained on the table, and that was final. He stepped toward me. He was close enough that I could smell his cologne, something expensive and wrong for a Saturday afternoon in a suburban backyard. He said, and I need you to hear the words he actually used because they matter, he said. You're a selfish old man and Frances would be ashamed of you. That was the sentence that crossed the line. I told him to get off my property. He shoved me, both hands on my chest. I'm 67 years old and I've been retired for 4 years. I stumbled backward and caught myself on the gate post, but my shoulder hit the corner of it hard and I felt something give. He came forward again, and this time he had his fist raised, and before I could get my footing, he hit me across the side of the face. I went down in the grass. I remember looking up at the sky. It was a clear blue Alberta afternoon. I could hear my neighbor's sprinkler somewhere nearby. I could hear my daughter saying something. I couldn't make out the words. I stayed down because I was 67 years old and he was 36, and getting up felt impossible. What I remember most is the quiet, the strange, suspended quiet before anything makes sense. What Bryce did not know, what neither of them knew, was that I'd had a security camera installed 18 months earlier. After a rash of break-ins on the street, my son had driven up from Victoria and spent a weekend putting cameras on the front of the house and the driveway. Wide angle, high definition, motion activated. The one above the garage had a clear line of sight to the front path and the gate. It had been recording everything. My daughter called 911 herself, I'll give her that. Or maybe she knew she had no choice. The ambulance came, and the police came, and I was taken to St. Joseph's with a fractured shoulder and a laceration above my ear that needed 6 stitches. Bryce was arrested in my driveway while I was being loaded into the ambulance. I watched from the stretcher. He was still arguing with the officers when they put him in the back of the cruiser. At the hospital, I sat in that waiting room alone. I didn't call my son until I'd been seen and treated and was waiting to be discharged, because I didn't want him to drive through the night in a panic. When I did call him, I told him everything. He was silent for a long time. Then he said he was coming up. He was there by noon the next day. The weeks that followed are the ones I find the hardest to talk about. Not because of the physical recovery. The shoulder healed, the stitches came out, but because of my daughter. She came to the house 4 days after the incident. I almost didn't open the door, but I did, because she's still my daughter. She sat in the kitchen where we'd had pot roast 3 months earlier, and she cried. She said she hadn't known Bryce would do what he did. She said she thought he was just going to talk to me. She said she was sorry. I listened to all of it. I didn't interrupt. Then I said something that surprised us both. I said, I believe you didn't know he'd hit me. I don't believe you didn't know he might. She didn't argue. That told me something. I also told her something I'd been thinking about since the hospital. In the weeks between the dinner and the confrontation, I'd received a call from my financial advisor. She'd noticed an unusual inquiry on my credit file. Someone had run a soft pull on my credit report. When I looked into it, I discovered that Bryce had contacted a mortgage brokerage and provided my personal information, including my SIN, as part of an application for a line of credit. He had forged a co-applicant signature. He hadn't only wanted my money, he'd been trying to access my credit. I had reported it to the RCMP before the day he came to my house. I hadn't mentioned it to my daughter because I was still trying to understand how far it went. After the assault, it all went into the same file. At trial 7 months later, Bryce was convicted of assault causing bodily harm. He received a sentence of 14 months to be served conditionally, along with a prohibition order that prevented him from contacting me. The fraud investigation took longer. The forged application was confirmed. He received an additional concurrent sentence and was ordered to pay restitution. His family's $45,000 wedding contribution, as far as I know, was never spent. The venue deposit was forfeited. My daughter did not marry him. She made that decision herself sometime in those weeks after the assault. She told me about it over the phone early on a Sunday morning. She said she'd been trying to understand how she'd gotten to the point where she was standing in her father's yard, watching her fiancé be arrested. And the more she thought about it, the more she realized she'd been shrinking herself for 2 years to fit inside the space he allowed her. She said it in those words, and they didn't sound like something Bryce would let her say. I told her she sounded like her mother. She cried again. So did I, a little. It's been just over a year now. My daughter is living back in Edmonton, in her own apartment. She's working at a different firm now, something she said she'd wanted to do for a while, but hadn't had the courage to try while Bryce was in her life. We talked twice a week, sometimes more. She came down for Easter. She brought her cat. We planted some new perennials in the backyard, and I taught her how to deadhead the roses properly, so they keep blooming through September. My son and his family came out for the long weekend in July. The twins are 7 now, and they ran through the sprinkler in the backyard until they were soaking wet and shaking, and still didn't want to come inside. I sat on the porch with a coffee and watched them, and thought about how Frances would have laughed herself silly. People ask me sometimes, when I tell them pieces of this story, whether I forgive Bryce. It's a question I find I can answer plainly. Forgiveness to me is about whether you carry the weight of something or put it down. I've put it down, not for his sake, for mine. I've had enough heavy things to carry in this life. What I find harder to answer is whether I regret not giving them the money. Whether, if I'd just written a check for $55,000, I'd still have my daughter whole and my shoulder intact and my Sunday mornings uninterrupted. But here's what I know. The man who shoved me in that yard and put his fist against my face because I said no to him, that man would have found something else to take. Maybe not that day, maybe not that year, but eventually. Because people like Bryce don't stop when they get what they want. They recalibrate. They find the new number. The $10,000 I offered is still sitting in my daughter's name in a high-interest savings account at my bank. She doesn't know about it yet. I'm going to give it to her when she finds something worth spending it on. Not a wedding for someone else. Something that's hers. Francis always said I was too stubborn to know when to fold. Maybe. But I know the difference between folding and falling, and I've spent 67 years making sure I can tell one from the other.